Alright, so today we're going to learn about interpreting solubility curves. There are some definitions though that we need first. So the first one is saturated solution. And a saturated solution contains the maximum amount of solute that can be dissolved. Unsaturated, the prefix un meaning under or less than. This contains less than the maximum amount. And then super, of course, meaning above or over, right? And so that contains more than the maximum amount of solute. Typically, what that means is that you still have not precipitate, but some solid at the bottom, right? You have some solid still left at the bottom, okay? All right, so let's look at some practice problems. So in your packets, you'll have a graph which looks like this. You should flip through your packet to find this graph. We'll be utilizing it today. Alright, so for our first practice problem question, we're going to look at this one, 10 degrees Celsius. At 10 degrees Celsius, what is the maximum amount of solute? In this case, our solute is going to be sodium chloride. That will dissolve. Alright, so if we look on our graph here, right, we have the mass of our solute per 100 grams of water. All of our problems will be for 100 grams of water in today's video. Our temperature down here, so as temperature increases, you can see here that generally solubility increases. There are some exceptions to that. You have NH3 here, which decreases, and you also have the cerium 3 sulfate, which also decreases. All the rest of them on this graph are increasing. So, let's answer our questions. We find 10 degrees, and when we find where it intersects with sodium chloride. So we find sodium chloride. Here's our sodium chloride line right here, and 10 degrees, and it shows us that we have about 38 grams that can dissolve. So our answer here is that 38 grams per 100 grams of water. So 38 grams of sodium chloride can dissolve per 100 grams of water. Now, of course, if we were to increase the amount of water, let's say we increase the amount of water to 200. So that would be twice as much solvent, so then we would be able to do twice as much solute, right? So if we had 200 grams of water, that would then equate to twice as much sodium chloride, which would be about 76 grams. Alright, so let's look at another problem. If 32 grams of potassium chlorate are dissolved, of course in our 100 grams of water, at 70 degrees, and the temperature is dropped to 50 degrees, how many grams of our solute potassium chlorate will precipitate? So again, let's have a look at our graph. We find our potassium chlorate. We see here at 70 degrees we have about 32 grams that can dissolve, which is what our problem told us. If we decrease that temperature to 50, how much are still dissolved? If we read our graph, it looks like about 20 grams. So we started out at 70 degrees and with 32 grams were dissolved, right? Started here and it has 32 grams were dissolved. If we drop to 50, our graph told us that we would get 20 grams that would still be dissolved. So if I subtract those two, I would find the amount that would precipitate. So 12 grams of potassium chlorate will precipitate. Right? That's again because this graph is telling us how much dissolves at each of these temperatures for each of these solutes. All right, let's look at a couple more questions. So the next one, which salt is least soluble at 20 degrees? All right, so we look at our graph. Which one has the least solubility at 20 degrees? So which one dissolves the least amount of solute at 20 degrees? That would be this one right here, and that would be potassium chlorate. Alright, so our final question for today's video, we have 30 grams of potassium nitrate that are dissolved in our 100 grams of water at 50 degrees. Now the question is this solution saturated, unsaturated, or supersaturated? So we find our potassium nitrate here, and we find 50 degrees right here, and we find that at 50 degrees, 80 grams makes it a saturated solution. So when it's directly, the value directly on the line, that's the maximum amount. So that is our saturated solution. So we dissolve 30, and so since 30 grams are less than our 80 grams, this is an unsaturated solution. Okay? Unsaturated. Okay. Let's look at one more question. So if we had 52 grams of ammonium chloride that are dissolved in 100 grams of water at a temperature of also 50 degrees, how would we describe that solution? So again, we look at our graph. We find 50 degrees, ammonium chloride will dissolve 50 grams. So our 52 is greater than the 50 grams the graph shows, and so that makes this a super saturated solution. Okay, so we'll be working on more of these throughout this unit.